Alrighty, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the final part three of our Inside Out Securing Your Digital, yes, Digital Future series. For almost forgot the name of the series there, doing this three times. We'll get started in just a minute here. We'll give a couple more minutes. So.
Thank you.
It just started snowing here, but it's like the really gross, big, wet, fat snowflakes. So I'm like, oh, this is gonna turn into sleet and then slush. And it's gross looking. I mean, it's pretty from inside, but I know I'm gonna have to go walk in it later and it's gonna be gross.
It's nice to look at. Terrible
Yeah,
to eat.
Exactly.
Unless you also have skis.
Unless you also have skis. There's a lot of Montreal is really big for cross country skiing.
Okay.
Like it's a big thing. You see people randomly on like a Wednesday night just walking through the streets with skis on their back. Like they just go to the parks around and they just it's weird. It's anyways. Okay. Well, I'll give it just the real one. Give it another minute here, just so that way.
Sounds good.
So, but yeah, I think cross country skiing is too much of a workout. I don't want to move forward. I want to go down. I don't have the chair to bring me up. Okay, 301 there. Okay, so we'll get started. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining today. This is part three, the Above the Clouds, Unlocking the Power of Secure Hosting series. This is our third and final webinar in this series. So how we're going to run it is we're going to do about 30 minutes in discussion, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end there. So thus far in the series, we've talked a lot about insider threats, how good policies protect your data, and from its biggest threats, which are people. And then last session, we talked about data security and how data loss prevention strategies help protect your data well from being lost. So finally, we are covering the cloud, which is the place where all of the data that you've worked to protect from these insider threats, and you put the policies and procedures into place to protect it actually lives. So this impacts a ton of businesses. If you're a business watching this, you are likely already using the cloud in some way, whether it be a public cloud or a privately owned cloud. You may also be utilizing software in your business that runs on one of these public clouds. So here to talk about our cloud hosting is Dan Reid. Hi, Dan.
Hello.
Dan is the CEO and founder of Framewerx, bringing more than 25 years of experience in IT infrastructure, data center operations, and enterprise systems design. A visionary technologist with a builder's mindset, Dan has spent his career architecting resilient, scalable environments that bridge the gap between traditional infrastructure and modern cloud capabilities. At Framewerx, he leads with a hands-on, innovation-driven approach, designing and operating private data centers while guiding the company's strategy for next-generation cloud, automation, and security solutions across North America. Known for pairing forward-thinking ideas with practical execution, Dan is passionate about creating technology ecosystems that are not only robust and secure, but transformative for the organizations that they support. So we definitely have an expert on the call today. So with that, all live attendees, just keep in mind at the end, there will be a link to get a free dark web assessment. So stick around for that. And Dan, I'm going to let you take it away here. So what is the cloud?
What is the cloud? That's the question I get a lot. And it kind of depends. There's a couple different answers for that. The easiest answer for most people to understand is that the cloud is the thing you don't control. You consume typically. Particularly when you talk about the SaaS applications like your Hotmail and other services. But essentially, it's not server. It's servers not in your environment, whether they're providing an application front end or if they're just giving you a lift and sit of the server that you used to see in your closet now is sitting on someone else's infrastructure. So that pretty much sums up the cloud in all its iterations. But yeah, it can get a little bit hairy, especially as we enter the new cloud operating systems that are coming out. So.
Okay, so the cloud is basically anything that lives on the internet then.
Basically, yeah, the cloud is someone else's computer system running it for you. This could be, QuickBooks Online. This could be your banking systems, right? That mobile app that we use, that we love so much, and do all our Apple Pays. Those are all cloud applications. Your Chat GPTs, everything like that. So.
Okay. So in terms of for businesses then, when they're thinking about the cloud, they're going out there, they're hosting their applications on, a public or a private cloud. Who's actually responsible for protecting it? And what does that look like there? Can a business just go out there to Microsoft and buy an Azure cloud and call it a day? They're like, oh yeah, I'm protected. I'm good now.
Yeah, that's actually the biggest mistake that ends up people think because it's on the cloud, it's not their responsibility. And that kind of leads into everything that we don't think of about the cloud. Often when people start taking in their information to that cloud, they think that it becomes that person who provides that service as a responsibility. For example, your Outlook email. Your Outlook email, they take a responsibility to make sure mail can flow to and from, but they actually don't take responsibility for your mail in itself. That becomes your responsibility. Who accesses that mail, how they access that mail or system. For example, QuickBooks. I'm going to pick on QuickBooks because I often like to grab a service that is sort of business oriented, but that is often the most misunderstood use of the cloud. The security of QuickBooks is not their responsibility. They give you the ability to secure your environment, but often people don't really control that security. So that becomes a rather large issue, and that's often ignored until it becomes a real problem. I've seen many companies lose access to their data, get it corrupted, or simply even have to rebuild it, and take months of their time.
So,
yep.
So in terms of that, then for a business, when we're talking about QuickBooks here, a business, they're running a lot of their payments and their accounts through QuickBooks. It's hosted online. That's a public cloud. QuickBooks is hosted online on a public cloud. QuickBooks, the application is responsible for, keeping the app up and running. However, the data inside of it, they're not responsible for protecting them.
No, they're not. So to give some of those examples, we'll talk about this user access. MFA, we all know it, we all hate it, but we all need it. Not only that, but who has access? Often we give too much access to our bookkeepers or to other people because it's simpler. We also don't control where they can access that from. If they're accessing that from other parts of the world, that's unexpected. That could cause problems. People may not be able to intercept that information and take control of it. This becomes particularly important with QuickBooks as an example, though, because we also like to integrate stuff with QuickBooks. We don't like to do all our transactions from our credit cards and so forth. So we link them up to our bank accounts, which on the surface of it is fantastic. It saves us a ton of time, it's able. But part of that problem that can run into is what happens if there's mistakes or bad imports of that data. You have to clean that up. To even register that it happened. That also can happen, particularly when we talk about how many people have probably been double charged for something. I certainly have been. I know others have been. That can happen and often will happen, particularly when you start linking things up together. In the way they do stuff, which introduces that last statement, which was, how do we protect our data in the cloud? It's on QuickBooks. They've already said that they're not responsible for your data. How often are you backing it up? Is there an audit log in place in case there's some issues, particularly with imports or transactions that automatically link? If you lose your data or it gets imported badly and you're at that stage where you just don't know what to do anymore, that's what your backups are for. I would say 9 out of 10 people don't back up QuickBooks, and it doesn't prompt you unless you go in and tell it to prompt you. That becomes other stuff. Not to mention how you use that service becomes their data. So you're giving these companies data. Is that the kind of data you want for them, right? Often those things are used to give you a better experience, but sometimes that's not exactly true. Sometimes they're selling that data to get someone else to call you as a sales call. So, when you talk about security in cloud, it's not just about access and disaster recovery. Sometimes it's about where our data goes.
So if I'm a small, oh, sorry, I'll let you keep going. I don't mean to cut you off at all.
I was just going to bring up one more thing that a lot of people forget. Businesses tend to be a little bit more cognizant of this, where your data goes. In other words, is your QuickBooks data being housed in a US-based data center or even overseas, over in the UK, where probably 70% of the world's websites are being hosted? So is it encrypted? Is it subject for other people to be looking at it? This becomes particularly a big issue. It was sort of bad enough in the days when we had machine learning going through all that data. Now we have agentic AI looking at your data in a way to glean new information. If it's not being held in Canada, what are the rules being applied to the data that gets sorted through that is yours?
So I'm just going to be really honest with you right here. You just open up a whole lot of different segues and just covered a bunch of different things here. We were talking about how you secure your data to, the policies and everything, and then where it's hosted,
then we
and
jumped off to where your data
jumped
goes.
to encryption. No, which is great, all relevant stuff. But from my perspective, I'm a non-technical person. I'm overwhelmed right now. I'm a
bring
business.
It back to a little bit of. I'll bring it back to a little bit easier to understand, particularly as we talk about the transition to the cloud. We all know, more and more workloads. I'm not even sure what's going to be left on premise anymore. Even if it's not in a public cloud where it's like QuickBooks, you're going to be talking about Azure, AWS, virtual machines. The misnomer is pretty much the thinking that, I put it up in their cloud, they're protecting me, they're taking care of my information, which often is not the case. Often these hyperscalers as well, they don't have a personal responsibility to your data. They're not doing your IT services. So, from their perspective, they're talking about underlying hardware, platform availability, physical storage. They give you a lot of tools to do your own stuff, governance and other security-based tools, but they don't actually enact them, right? So when it's easy to push stuff up into the cloud, the bigger challenge is going to be making sure you do it correctly. Just because we move that server that used to sit in the closet up to the cloud doesn't mean we don't have responsibility to do some of the things that we always had to do here. It was a little bit easier to understand what was here. Of course, a backup had to occur.
When you could
maybe
see
someone
it.
changed a tape. Somebody did that. You didn't have as many access concerns when it was sitting in your closet because they still had to physically usually get into your building in order for that to occur. Well, now that it's in the cloud and can be accessed anywhere in the world, what are we doing about it? How are you controlling that? And what are the things that need to happen in order for you to make sure that that data stays yours and also stays available to run your business? More and more businesses nowadays can't live without their computer systems. And it's only getting worse as we continue to engage in various different AIs, hybrid systems. I'm pretty certain Uber was not very happy when AWS went down. They were impacted massively worldwide. Couldn't get a lift. That's when Azure went down. I think 9 days later. Your responsibility for you have two different risks. You obviously have the risk of why you picked them, which is, as a rule, they're a very stable platform. But because they're so stable, the hidden truth of the fact that you are still owning your own infrastructure, your own security, your own policies, and more importantly, your own ability to recover, the ability to operate as a business. What's the risk versus reward?
So if I'm a business owner, right here, listening to this, and I go out there and I buy an Azure cloud service or a Google Workspace, cloud service right here, and I'm like, okay, I got all my data, I'm running my applications in here, I'm good. What's something that I should be thinking about right now that's actually on me as a business, my responsibility, that is not actually on the cloud providers that I may have thought was on them?
The biggest one would be like your patching and your different baselines of data. I'll think of like firewalls. Just because it's on the cloud doesn't mean you don't need a firewall to protect your data. More and more of these services are being attacked. They don't have an obligation to tell you that that your data has been breached, because they don't really care whether it was you legitimately or a bad actor or an internal threat that's grabbing your data. They don't look at it that way. They look at it as the platform's available. So as a business owner, you need somebody to manage that, make sure it's set up correctly. You need, usually the same person as well to do audit logging and all the proactive maintenance and to find out what is actually happening in your environment. And these are all things that you need to do despite whether or not you might also have compliance considerations, like where is your private data going? And I'll think the most common one that is often overlooked, we all in businesses pay people. We have their birth date, their social insurance number, SIN number, their address, often their banking details. We have all the things that is governed under HIPAA here in Canada. And we need to make sure that that data doesn't get leaked out outside of, not just outside of the organization to a bad actor, but even internally. With the advent of AI, getting access to that data, it's more important to ensure your role-based accesses are actually set up right. Many times in the past, I'm guilty of it. Everybody's been guilty of it in their history if they ever run a business is, yeah, they have access, but they don't look there kind of comment, right? That's what happens. And because we trust in people don't look where they don't belong. AI doesn't care. So that's the need for role-based access is become super important so that, if I'm an employee of a company accessing data in the systems, maybe I never would have looked there in the past, but now more and more businesses are integrating their technology with the Copilot, and getting access to that data immediately, even by accident. We tested it out. How many times have you accidentally sent that spreadsheet in an email that had more information on it than you didn't want? Now the end user goes, because ChatGPT is free, Copilot's free, you just have to use their website. I can just go ahead and question it. It's going to find it in my email.
Well,
even if I never looked at it.
I think that's a really good point to bring up a specific case that actually, happened internally. Here we can talk about that a bit. There's a situation with when we're talking about, Copilot being able to pull and scrape everything. This kind of goes back to that whole like insider threats, data security. So we're kind of leading away from cloud here, but there was an instance that you had where you had your ownership files and your upper management all shared a file, a location in the cloud, and you sent out a notification to the company about a notice of like year-end pay increases. And what happened was somebody who didn't have, who usually you didn't know that they had access to that. Copilot automatically pulled it, scraped it, and attached it to that person who did have access to that file, but they didn't know that they had access to that file, and put it in there. And that's huge. Luckily, the person who had access to that, they didn't need to have access to that, but it wasn't, a big deal.
Yeah, it was a pretty eye-opening moment. I mean, we always talk about it until it actually jumps and kind of, I'll call it punches you in the face and realize that, this is a real thing. And I think we tracked it back to it was a hidden Excel form inside there. So there was really no reason for even a quick glance to understand that it was there. Copilot gave me the answer. I wasn't even asking for that answer. I was just testing it on different things, and all of a sudden it basically gave it to me in table format of data that was obviously very concerning. So when we think about the cloud, and we think about these technologies that are interacting. This is the equivalent of, banks interacting with your QuickBooks Online. Well, this is Copilot interacting with all your data and your email systems. Role-based access is at the bare minimum of what that is. We're starting to move upstream as well in the cloud-based systems into data targeting or data tagging, which for all those people who are listening, DLP, data leak prevention. This is going to become a rather large discussion.
But last session it was data loss prevention was DLP.
But they actually mean both. There's a couple different.
Too many acronyms.
We love acronyms. I used to feel really bad about acronyms until I entered into a couple other fields, and they have all their own acronyms. So you have to almost know which industry you're talking about. But yeah, no. This is why, regardless of whether you live in the cloud or you live live on premise, the going to the cloud does not absolve you of the security concerns you have. If anything, it actually increases it. Because of the technologies that can now integrate automatically with your data to give you better insight. We always talk about the positives of the insight, they are all positive. They are fantastic. But we also have to be aware that those same technologies, because they're not humans, right? They don't think, they don't feel, they just give data, and they have access to all of it, even all the stuff that you forgot you received, 15 years ago in your email account, that it gives you that information, and it might give somebody else that information without you realizing it. So, ignoring security just because you went to the cloud is obviously a real big risk. The other side of that is on top of that, going to the cloud, they guarantee their service, not yours. So as an example, like I said, as an example, how does if you were a cloud provider and they're a big cloud provider that doesn't really know your business, they're just bringing up the workloads as they, as fast as they can without regards to how that impacts your business. One of the advantages of going to a smaller cloud provider is that you can get to know those businesses, particularly when they're your IT vendors, or at the very least you can call them and they'll take your call. Anybody called Microsoft lately?
I spent 6 hours on hold.
6 hours on hold. But be able to call your provider up and be able to say, yeah, I know we've had an issue, but this is what's important to me. Or they automatically know what's important to you. Bringing up all of your financial systems when your shop floor can't work doesn't mean anything, right? So if there's a choice to be made, working at what's important to your business becomes the next stage. Some people do this by creating multi-clouds so that they can prevent that. Other people do it just with relationships. So
if we're talking about public clouds here, the biggest takeaway that people can have from this is that they need to have better access control. So zero trust security, that's the biggest thing. Probably they need to monitor the access. Monitor the activity that's actually happening within the cloud, and they need to actually back it up. Because even though it's being stored there, Google isn't backing it up; they're just storing it. They're not backing it up. So
absolutely,
the three things that businesses can take away from that.
Retention. Yeah. The other side of that is a backup. Sometimes testing what those backups are, and that's what your IT provider can provide for you. I've been in many situations where the data is good data. You can bring it back to the vendor to get your systems back online. But that makes it really, really difficult if that vendor goes out of business. Or that vendor says, yeah, that there's something wrong with that data. So looking at not only your backup, but also making sure that the data is usable for you. So that if you need to move from QuickBooks Online, I'm going to keep picking on QuickBooks, sorry guys, over to say
we're going to get a call from them.
Yeah, we're going to get a call from them. Going over to Sage 50. Well, then they should give a better tools for the unknowing business owners that don't have IT departments. Make it punch them in the face with what they need to do.
Oh God.
But yeah, exactly. No, but it is important that when you look at the kind of data that if you can back it up, or understanding that you can't back it up. There are situations where you will never get your data back. You have to trust into how they're doing it. That could be that your backup might be literally a printed report with a PDF, and that's how you get your data. But part of all this is you understanding that, so that you don't abdicate your responsibility. Right, it is your problem. You're giving them some responsibility to make sure that the system's available for you and everything else. You can't abdicate the responsibility of what the secure access looks like, where it's accessed, logging to ensure people are not accessing the data incorrectly, either through insider threats or external. And then back down to the disaster recovery, because at the end of the day, that business is probably going to survive you going out of business. The goal of doing all this stuff is to make sure that you continue to be in business for the long term.
So from that standpoint, then when people are often asking about like a public or a private cloud, it's usually a hybrid approach. I think you were kind of starting to get into that a few minutes ago. You can have your Google Cloud or your AWS cloud, but those backups and the things that you're storing internally should be done on a private cloud internally, especially if you're in a compliance heavy industry, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Knowing if in a compliant heavy industry, it's very important that you can back up your data and control your data. That's usually the foundational requirement of compliance. And then the hybrid approach, some services, we run a private cloud. We're not the best choice. Right? The idea of where you belong, where your data belongs, can matter, right? The private cloud's not always the right choice. The public cloud's not always the right choice. Sometimes it's literally the business type. The business type will determine what the risk looks like. It could be how the business is distributed. Are all your people in one location? Are you distributed across the country? Right? COVID showed us that a lot of roles can be run remotely. Now you have to worry about, I can't just say everybody's in my office, therefore that's the only place they can access the data from. Now they're accessing on their phones, from home, from devices that are not corporately controlled. So what kind of solutions you need to place to make sure that your data, when you make it more accessible for convenience, you also make it easier for the world to attack you.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that you mitigate that risk? So
no,
number of different questions.
Yeah, no, in terms of that, I mean, what would your recommendations be then for a business who is looking for a new cloud provider? Obviously there's a lot of different things out there, a lot of different needs depending on the industry that you're in. But what should they be looking for? What do you recommend first if somebody's coming to you and saying, what should I be looking for?
It always starts with a conversation about your business. What are the things that happen? What are the things that are needed? So I always look at, do you have a diverse workforce that comes from multiple locations? What's the risk profile? Every owner is a little bit different. Some owners are willing to take risk, and some of them aren't. As long as it's well understood, it usually begins with a good IT provider to begin with. In a private cloud, obviously that they take security extremely important. All the big boys have it. So at the end of the day, they have the tools. You still need a person who's familiar with those tools, knows how to implement those tools, and works with you directly. The things that are important to you as a business need to become important to how you store and run your data. So that's where it always starts with that knowing side. Is as hard as it can be. The good providers, they can get to know your business. It's usually a journey. You don't get the silver bullet on day one, right? Because there's usually a lot of hidden, I'll call them landmines in the way your business operates. But understanding what the risk profile is, so you can make the right decisions, particularly as it relates to cost or access. Those are usually the beginning building blocks to how you pick a provider and a public cloud provider. Usually your public ones, can offer some savings over private ones, but they often come with a lot heavier management, hidden costs to manage those environments. So that's an important side effect of doing it. You do get more centralized control if you're in the US. In Canada, we tend to have issues with the bigger boys because they're not around everywhere. Like if you're Azure, you have to be Central or Eastern Canada. You don't have a Western Canada option in order to store data. So you're increasing a certain amount of latency. Other the big providers don't have any presence whatsoever. So if data sovereignty or where you host your data matters to you, you don't have a lot of choices. You're going to be forced to look at private cloud providers. But even when you're looking at things like Microsoft 365, you need to ensure that it is actually configured correctly. If you don't tell them that data has to be in Canada, they're going to put it in their cheapest data center. That could be in the UK. So it might not even be the US. Knowledge is key, I guess, is the right one, and having a good advisor, and also learning what's important to you as a business in terms of how to figure out where to put your data and why, because it's always about the cost to reward scenario. What's the value of putting it in one place versus another?
No, yeah. I think that's the biggest thing is that a lot of people, a lot of business owners, they often think like, that's immediately always the first thought, like, what's that going to cost? What am I going to have to pay for that? Like, okay, yeah, it sounds, a lot of people hear private data centers or private clouds and they hear like, cha-ching, like the money sounds, they're like, okay, that's going to be expensive. But really, even if you're going over with a public cloud, like you're saying, there's all of that back end management that has to be done, and they may not even know that there's that management. So now not only is that management not being done, you're also completely going to lose out on your data, and it's unsecure because that's not the provider's job. So you've been spending the money for nothing.
Yeah, it's a bit of a misconception as well, about the public ones being cheaper than private ones. The public ones are more expensive. They offer a greater variety of services than often your private ones. So you'd be surprised at how often we come up against the big boys and end up at the same or even lower prices. We don't offer everything that the public cloud to do. This goes back to the statements we had before. Every cloud is a little different. If you were coming today to Framewerx to run an AI-based cloud, that's not us. That's AWS, that's Azure. And we don't offer that service. So therefore, we don't have to have the structure or infrastructure necessary to run something at that degree. So then when you go to a public cloud, they do have different data centers that do different things. However, lots of the times they still have to be designed to a standard because they have the same problems that everybody has, which is they need to standardize their environment. So the other side of that is understanding the hidden cost. So even when the upfront cost isn't well understood, data movement within those data centers can be quite costly, quite surprising, that are not well known. Right?
What do you mean movement within the data centers?
If you need to move data between different Azure data centers or Azure to AWS, or they only allow a certain amount of internet traffic included with your services. So data moving within your environment can actually cost you money that has nothing to do with the actual service. Nothing to do with the base price of the service that you're looking at. That's often where private clouds, I'll call, give away the money. They build for that. But in order for the public clouds to lower their prices to make them look more attractive, they bury it in either tools or in subordinate costs, right? In terms of, and usually in the form of data movement, which is what the concept of that is. So picking a private versus a public cloud does come down to understanding your business, where you want to do your costs, what's the security requirements that you may or may not have. And then just picking the right person that's going to be there for you. If it's a non-critical business service, you might opt for cost. But if it's a critical business service, and that's the way you need to think of it, if the service goes down, are you making money? Are you able to make money? If the answer is no, you need to really compare what that looks like and what the services are. Often the big boys are very stable, but they often, when they have outages, they take a lot longer for those outages to resolve.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much, Dan, for going over that. and kind of demystifying the cloud a bit. I think the biggest takeaway today is that the cloud is a very secure place as long as the proper guidelines and policies are being put into place. All clouds are going to have an outage at some point. The only difference is how much does it impact your business and what are you willing to risk, and that the responsibility isn't all on the provider. You're responsible as a business for securing your information. So
Yeah,
no,
thank you.
that's
Yep.
thank you so much for that. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, now would be a great opportunity to drop them in there. As well, if you want to know where you stand, we do have a complimentary dark web scan for live attendees. So I will go ahead and drop the link in the chat right now, and do that. Adam here has a question. He says, what should we do, if anything, if my hosting provider has a breach? Good one.
That's a very good question. It depends on they should be disclosing what kind of a breach that occurs, what information is done. So there's all types of breaches that a hosting provider could get. A breach of an individual client typically does not get reported. But a breach on the client level, you have to ask and understand what kind of data is accessible to that breach. It might just be their information, but working with and developing a bit of an incident response plan, it's no different than your own internal location being breached. You pretty much go through all the same steps that you would externally, whether you would internally. So the first beginnings of that is reach out to your hosting provider, find out what information is actually been breached, and what the resolutions were. Do they have systems in place to prevent that, to keep the data that is critical to you away from their information? So I would begin with an incident response plan, and it's gonna vary in every single case, but having an incident response plan is probably the best way to start.
That's good. Every business is different, but knowing how and who's responsible for reaching out to your provider, and what goes into that, that's important.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely important. A lot of the times, it gets overlooked, the communication portion of an incident response plan, both to internal stakeholders, as in your employees and everything else, as well as external ones, and also making sure that the lines of communication are clear about what the breach is and what the impact is. So, that's where the incident response plans come in, because it's too easy to think of just the technical side of the problem.
I have a question. Do you have any personal experience yourself with, a cloud hosting story gone wrong? Whether it be you've seen it in another business, a client in the past,
I've seen
somewhere
many.
where, there's
Which
do you have a favorite?
My favorite?
Putting you on the spot here.
Putting me on the spot. Well, we were involved with a ransom attack that was an active group of hackers against one of our client businesses. They were completely hosted in our environment. It came through, not unsurprisingly, an individual having gone and done the wrong thing. The biggest issue that you run into in that one is, again, it's uptime and business time. It was a relatively simplistic attack where it just did ransom, but it was a scale of which there was about 250 machines, over 100 servers. It was quite an exciting time. Luckily, we did have an incident response plan. That wasn't always true in the history of Framewerx. But as we rolled out our incident response plan, we were able to isolate that environment, prevent it from getting further encrypted, because the team was actively on it within, I think it was about 15 minutes. I was actually very proud of the team. They've got on the problems within 15 minutes. They isolated what was happening, took a little bit to figure out the source. That being the reason for an incident response plan is, instead of playing whack-a-mole and trying to hit where they're at, you needed to figure out how they got in, it's like somebody breaking into your house. What windows did they open? What doors did they leave unlocked? They're able to resolve that in a relatively short period of time. Once that was solved, and I think the total number of business hours was only a couple hours before critical services were up, and that was mostly because it took time to come through. You have to lock out the attackers and restore the systems to critical functionality within a couple hours, and the entire system by about the end of the all servers by the end of that day, and all critical workstations and subordinate workstations by the end of business day the next day. The actual impact of the business was relatively minor. So it is a very successful story, as most, we've seen industry news after industry news where companies are down for not just days, but usually weeks and sometimes months to try to resolve these issues, plus reinfection. The team, following that incident response plan, was able to, lock them out, make sure they couldn't get in. The business was minorly impacted in the event. Like any impact to a business of that size, though, it looks big. But it was a particularly proud moment that I have. Everything I've said here in terms of business continuity and disaster recovery came into play during that exercise. Luckily, we'd run through it before, and they were able to do quite well at it. And that was a relatively small team. So that's where we talk about, when security fails, what happens, right? Because it's not a question of if you get ransomware. That was been the story for quite some time. It's when and how fast you get up and running. That's the discussion of the critical story. Because in that particular incident, it was a manufacturing client, and they were up on the floor with only a couple hours. Because we knew that was what was important to that client, and ensuring that became the first thing that gets exercised for them was important. We could have gone many different things and got many different services restored that wouldn't have meant much to the client if we didn't know which order to ensure that they got back up and running under. That's my favorite story.
That sounds like a great story. Great for Framewerx. A little plug for ourselves there, which kind of leads me into Ben's question, actually, which was, can you provide a brief overview of what Framewerx's cloud looks like? What is the main draw? I think being that we can get your systems all back within, 2 business days. No.
Yeah, we take security extremely seriously. Everybody in the entire company takes it extremely seriously. A lot of, we don't want clients who don't want security. One of the big draws that we do is we actually right now only host for managed services customers. We don't host for external companies, because it's important to us to understand your business and ensure that everything's lined up in a way that's designed for you. The biggest draw, I'd say, is we have all the same capabilities of a lot of the biggest boys out there. And with the ability to layer on the security. And by that, I mean the way we replicate to multiple data centers. We have instant response plans in place. We have the ability to recover any workload of any size in under 15 minutes and back to full production speeds. That's some of the differences that we do. We have, I think it's 5 levels of backup that we employ across all customers, regardless of who they are. It's not a request. It's part of being part of our hosting environment. So because your business operating is extremely important to us, because it affects our business. Our ability for you to continue being viable business is pretty much our number one goal. It's a little self-serving, but it also ensures that it's that mutual beneficiary engagement and relationship that matters the most to us. And engaging in all the latest technologies to ensure that I don't get hit. I would much prefer talk about how we don't get hit rather than trying to explain how did we overlook something. So I would say that's the benefit that we have is everything we do is security first. And that ensures our customers' businesses continue to thrive. And technology is not a thought. in their brain,
Yeah.
which is fantastic. It becomes our every waking moment so that they can focus on their business.
No, and best part is you don't have to
Thanks.
spend 6 hours on hold with us. Maybe, no. I'm sure when you're in a crisis, it feels like 6 hours, but
Every
no.
second feels like a day. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, that takes us to nearly the end of our time there, unless there's any last minute questions, but I'm not seeing any so far. So, thank you, Dan, for going over this today and, being part of the session. It was great having you on and to talk about the experience. I know the data center is your pride and joy and what you really enjoy doing in the IT world. So it's great to hear
I
that
could
and a
spend
bit of that
hours
passion come
talking
out.
about it.
No.
So thank you very much.
Okay, awesome. Well, everybody take care. Have a great weekend. If it's not snowing for you guys wherever you are, then that's wonderful. I hope it continues to not snow. For me, it'll be cold, but yeah. So take care, guys. Thanks for joining the webinar session, and I'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.